Oh, that's all right.
Because in the office.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Planning and Development Board. For those of you who are not aware, we are now broadcasting on YouTube. So be careful how you speak. Members, I only have one announcement before we go, well, two announcements actually before we go into the agenda. The first one is that I intend to bring forward the consideration of the backstop application in the large appendix on the public gallery, and we'll do that immediately after going through the first three items on the agenda. The second one, members, you may be aware that we have a special guest sitting over there. Mr. Richard Dobbs has worked for the authority for 17 years. And I'm sure that this is the first time in all that 17 years he's attended the planning board, slightly before he leaves the authority later this week. Mr. Dobbs is appropriately dressed in blue because he's leaving us to head the sub-regional recycling facility, which most of us know as the Smurf. So it's good to see you in an appropriate colour, Mr. Dobbs. And I have to say, as somebody who's been with the authority for quite a lot of those 17 years, the very best of luck in your new role. We've thoroughly, I think, all enjoyed working with you and benefited from your wise counsel. So thank you for everything you've done, and the very best of luck with the Smurf.
Thank you, Chair.
Agenda item number one is the evacuation procedure. For those of you who don't know, we're not expecting to have any fire alarms or tests of the facility this evening. So if the fire alarm does sound, it's likely to be a real event. If you hear the alarm, please leave the building by the nearest safest exit, which is likely to be that door. Failing that, it'll be the door to Civic Street that you entered the building by. Please leave the building in a safe and orderly manner and go to Assembly Block G on the car park, which is just beyond Mr. Dobbs beyond those windows, and stay there until tonight's officer, Mr. Tobin, says it's safe to do otherwise. Please don't just go home, because as you know, we have a list of everyone here, which we need to provide to the fire brigade in the event of an evacuation. And I'd hate them to be running around looking for you to find that you were at home with a cup of tea and a hot mug. Mr. Tobin, apologies for absence or members away on official council business.
Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Tony Clues, and substitute for him tonight is Councillor Mrs. Smith. We have apologies for Councillor Jarvis, and substitute is Councillor Denise Clues. Apologies from Councillor Parsons, and the substitute is Councillor Chambers. And we have apologies from Councillor Moss, who she is still unknown.
Thank you very much, members. Are you okay to note those variations? And welcome back to Councillor Clues, Councillor Chambers, and I think for the first time, Councillor Smith. So I hope you all enjoy tonight's meeting. Members, do we have any disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests? No? Thank you very much. In that case, then we will move straight on to the planning application for planning application number 295 for land to the west of Hams Hall roundabout and south of Marsh Lane, Kirkwood. We have two speakers this evening, both in person, the first of which is Mr. Richard Hadgood. If you take the speaker's chair, Mr. Hadgood, whilst Mr. Brown introduces his report. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just forgive me while I get to the report. Right, here we are. I'll just run through the slides first for you, Mr. Chairman. Members will be familiar with this. Codes listed south and the M42 is here, Coed over to the left. Faraday Avenue and the roundabout on 446, as you can see here, with Faraday Avenue going down to Hams Hall. Marsh Lane and the overbridge over the motorway, and the two parcels of land, one to the south of Marsh Lane here, and the one to the north of Marsh Lane, either side effectively at Spring Farm. The application is for the HGV park, as you can see laid out here with its landscaping, the access with its roundabout access onto Marsh Lane, and the subsequent changes to the roundabout or access to the roundabout on Faraday Avenue over here. The southern part of the southern parcel land is to be landscaped and used for biodiversity improvements as indicated in the report. And then just finally, a detail of the actual access arrangements, the final access arrangements as agreed with the highway authorities a few weeks ago, show the roundabout access here and leading on to Faraday Avenue. I've no intention, Mr. Chairman, of going through the full report. It's a very full report. It goes through all of the cases, case for and the case against. You'll see from the report, Mr. Chairman, that the final planning balance is very finely balanced. I had to come down one side or the other. I've come down on the side of the green belt, having greater weight. It's entirely open to the board and to members to give different weightings to the balance because it is a fine balance, and you'll see that from the committee report in terms of the planning impacts and also the case that the applicant has put forward. I have to say, Mr. Chairman, as the committee report indicated, it is a strong case. It carries substantial weight, and that's the reason why the final planning balance is not one that can be understood right from the beginning. So, members, I know there are speakers, and I'll let them speak now, Mr. Chairman. One of the letters that came in before the weekend has been circulated to members beforehand. There are hard copies on the desks in front of them, and there's some extra hard copies up on the table where the speaker is sitting. I'm no doubt the applicant will be referring to that when he addresses the board.
Thank you, Mr. Members, you will all see you have this on your desk in front of you. Could you all just let me know by nodding your heads that you have had the opportunity to read that and you have in fact read it? If anyone hasn't, then we'll adjourn for 5 minutes to give you a chance to do so. Has anyone not read it? Thank you very much. Mr. Habgood, welcome to the Council House.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tobin will explain the rules of engagement for public speaking. Mr. Tobin.
Good evening. In a moment, you'll be given 3 minutes in which to address the board. So I'll let you know when your 3 minutes starts. I'll let you know when you have 1 minute remaining, and then I'll let you know at the end of 3 minutes if you're still speaking. Your time starts now.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board, my name is Richard Habgood and I'm a councillor for Kirklees Parish Council. I'm a vastly experienced construction professional that has dealt with planning, design and management issues for a very long time. I'm also a past chair of the Construction Industry Council of Midlands, which is a multi-professional organisation that represents, amongst others, the architectural, engineering, town planners, etc. Why I'm telling you this is because it is, in my opinion, and that of our planning subcommittee, that the application before you has the arrogance of assumption that it will succeed. The applicant's eagerness to show far and wide external support is a perceived big stick to put us all in our place, as is his commitment to introduce numerous offset measures to placate our legitimate concerns over wide-ranging ecological, heritage, environmental issues, etc., that we have constantly expressed since 2020. This application has been flawed from the outset. Then and today, the issues centre on the site location being in Greenbelt land. Now I want to quote your local plan of 2021. The rural character of North Warwickshire is to be protected and or indeed kept, sentence 1. The maintenance of the green belt is seen as a vital component in protecting and enhancing the borough as an area of pleasant countryside, especially by preventing the incursion of nearby urban areas. It is not just the wholeness of the green belt designation that is important, but having defensive boundaries. Mr. Chairman, we ask for nothing more. This application, if approved, will not only fulfil these hard-end objectives, aims and goals, but will also open tomorrow's applications for greenbelt incursion on the adjacent land right up to junction 9 of the M42. Junction 9 of the M42 is particularly pertinent to this application, as this island is constantly and frequently log jammed. The design proposals for Marsh Lane will permanently impact upon Kirkworth Village and a working farm off Marsh Lane most severely. Marsh Lane is the only ingress and egress point to the south and east of the village. If this outline application is approved, the increased traffic flow predicted by the applicant's modelling will be challenged, as will any improvement works proposed for Junction 9. Finally, it is well documented within your papers about the applicant's reluctance to examine the many alternative sites to service the logistic parks. Sorry?
Your time is now ending. 3 minutes is up.
Thank you, Mr. Hagwood. Members, do you have any questions while speaking? Councillor Bell.
Didn't hear you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Can I ask, just, I know it's really important, just for me, just put to one side the Greenbelt issue. Are there problems in the area from not having the truck stop at the moment? And then you made a comment about it's not going to work. I just wanted to understand in what way, should it have gone ahead? In what way would it not work to alleviate any problems that there may be in the area with trucks parking anywhere?
Where do I begin with that answer? That's a really detailed question.
Well, it wasn't meant to be.
Yes. Right. I made when I say it's not going to work, I think you're taking what I said out of context, to be honest. You know, what I said is that the proposed siting is in Greenbelt land. The proposed siting is north and south of Marsh Lane, which is the one and only south and eastern ingress and egress point to the village. What I haven't told you is that the application, what I haven't said is that I'm just a bit confused by your question. I'm sorry, Miss.
I was just asking in what ways would it not work if it were to be approved?
What ways
in
would
terms
it not
of getting
work?
the trucks off the side roads?
It would have a disastrous effect on the village.
Okay,
That's really what it is. I sat here 2 years ago and 2.5 years ago and said to this very board, I have never seen such anger about the proposed incursion into Greenbelt land. And to us, it's a Greenbelt issue. Fully and foremost, it's a Greenbelt issue. Nothing else, you know, nothing else. It's just a Greenbelt incursion.
thank you.
Councillor Ryan.
Thank you. How do I understand you know the area well? And obviously you're aware of all of the problems that usually occur because of HGV parking. However, do you think that there is a demand at the moment? Are there any alternate sites?
Well,
Or is there a problem with HGVs within the local community parking outside Hounslow?
I'm unaware of a problem. In fact, the applicant frequently talks about excessive numbers, and our research, we have people who walk that frequently, and there are nowhere near the number of vehicles as a general. We don't have a problem with the vehicles. The alternative sites is a very interesting one, because I was just going to close on that by saying we are disappointed that the applicant has failed to demonstrate, shall we say, the considerable number of alternative sites that are available within the Hounslow and Dordon area, within the Golden Triangle, and in particular, the 50-kilometre radius, which is quite important in road haulage terms. This application was born out of the Department of Transport report of 2018 that identified a shortfall of 260 lorry parking spaces in Hams Hall. I would like to point out to the chairman, and to the meeting, that since the publication of this report, there are more than 200 places that have been created or in the planning stage within this 50-kilometre distance, as well as there is also another proposal that you have, when I say you, the borough have, at Junction 10 for 156 places. So we don't see the need for greenbelt, for the incursion into our greenbelt land, which we regard as so preciously around our village. You know, there is nothing so important as the greenbelt that is the nearest thing to your village.
Members, any other question? I just have one question, if I may, Mr. Hapgood. You may be aware that we've received a small number of 380 objections to the application. In your view, does that represent the strength of feeling in the village?
If I suspect that 380, yes, is the short answer to your question, Mr. Chairman. It's village-wide, it's parish-wide. There is almost without exception 100% objection to this proposal. And I would say if you've had 380 letters, that might be from 380 different addresses, which of course doesn't necessarily means that it's probably more than one person of age that can voice an opinion against it.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? In which case, thank you very much, Mr. Hapgood.
Thank you.
Member, our next speaker is Mr. Steve Harley. Mr. Harley, if you take the speaker's chair. Welcome to the council. Mr. Tobin will explain the rules on public speaking.
As you will have seen for the previous speaker, you're allowed 3 minutes in which to address the board, so I'll let you know when the 3 minutes starts. I'll remind you when you have a minute remaining, and then if you speak again, that's times. Your 3 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. This application was submitted in response to issues and problems associated with the shortage of HGV parking and truck stop facilities. This has been recognised widely both at national level and locally over many years. In 2018, the government identified the Hams Hall Birch Coppice area as a severe shortage hotspot and identified an urgent need for additional facilities. Since then, government has strengthened the calls to support the distribution sector, including through positive planning decisions which enable overnight HGV parking facilities to be provided, and the national policies of the NPPF support delivery of HGV parking explicitly too. The council has also responded to these problems through local plan policy LP 34, which encourages and explicitly supports proposals which improve parking supply. This follows reports and complaints over many years about road safety, drivers washing or going to the toilet at the roadside, and about general antisocial impacts of inadequate parking at and around Hams Hall. The policy you've adopted also recognises the importance of the distribution sector to the economy. Tonight, you are being asked to take a judgment on the balance of likely benefits versus likely harm, and the officer's report identifies a fine balance, as Mr. Brown's explained. The report rightly attaches substantial weight to the national and local need issues and evidence which support proposals, and the proposals accord with new policy LP 34 and the local plan. However, in seeking to identify issues which weigh against the scheme, the report includes judgments regarding potential harm on local amenity. The application includes assessments of all relevant topics, and there are no objections from technical consultees, including the Environmental Health Officer, who agrees the proposals are unlikely to result in any adverse noise effects at any nearby properties. Contrary to that professional advice and the evidence, the committee report suggests some adverse noise impacts are likely. Similarly, the officer's report identifies moderate harm is likely with regard to lighting and visual effects incurred west of the M42. Again, contrary to the evidence submitted, and without technical advice or objection to underpin that judgment.
Have 1 minute remaining.
Technical advice says only negligible effects are likely, and there are very limited views of this site from surrounding properties. The committee will appreciate the importance of clear and defensible decisions. The evidence regarding the likely impact suggests the overall planning balance is not particularly fine. The material considerations in favour are substantial and outweigh the likely limited harm, including to the green belt, which is clearly a key issue. These proposals would support a priority economic sector and would directly address the specific problems identified here. The local plan has acknowledged the problem, but not allocated sites for HGV parking, leaving it to the market to propose the sites. These proposals are adjacent to Hamshall, one of the main areas in most need of intervention. And both Shell and BP are both interested potential occupiers of this site. The market is responding, keen to engage and help solve the problems. So we urge members to revisit and scrutinise the planning balance presented in the report and take a positive approach which secures the opportunity offered by these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harley. Members, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Harley? Councillor Bell?
Thank you. It seems to me there are three interrelated but separate issues on this. One is there a need for a truck stop? And I'd just like to know whether you think there's evidence for that. Secondly, if there were a truck stop, is there evidence that the drivers would use it rather than and pay rather than driving parking on the road as they presumably are at the moment? And the third one is the location. And if assuming the first two are that we do need a truck stop, then is there really nowhere else to put it except in the green belt?
Thank you. Good question. So on need then, the simple answer is yes. You don't have to take our word for that. You'd expect me to say that. The government identified a need in 2018. And at that point, they did a national survey of truck stops. And as I said, they identified a number of hotspots. And this site is in one. And that hotspot's related to Hamshall and Birch Coppice. Yeah. So subsequent to that, we did our own what's called a beat survey, where we counted vehicles parked in inappropriate places, and it showed there is a need. So we can go into a bit more detail, but the answer to that in simple terms is yes, and that's not just us saying that, others saying that. The Road Haulage Association supported the application directly off the back of their understanding of need, and they represent the haulage sector and they understand the needs of the drivers and their member operators. In terms of evidence about would they use it, that's a really interesting one, and we've had this a lot. We've tried to explain a bit about the rationale there. The police tell us that in the absence of dedicated HGV truck stops where they can direct HGVs to, it's very hard for them to enforce against dangerous or unsafe parking behaviour. Where there is a site provided, but the police then have a bigger stick to hit the drivers with than they can find, because they can say there is no reason for you to be parked here. There's a perfectly good and safe environment there. So that's an important part of the answer. But also just hauliers tell us their drivers need to be safe. You know, when they're away from home for days on end, as they often are, they need somewhere safe where they can sleep, have a wash, something to eat. And the crime levels against drivers is unbelievably high. And that's something that Road Haulage Association have done a lot of work on. So there is evidence both from because it's a safer place for drivers to be, but also because from an enforcement point of view, it becomes easy to send them there once the facilities exist. Which they don't at the moment. In terms of the location, I haven't done a very good job of writing your question down. The
location, is there really nowhere else except?
Oh, thank you. On an alternative, thank you. Yes, so I mean, my colleague from the Parish Council was not quite right, and I think Mr. Brown's report is helpful in reflecting the fact we did look at alternatives. There are no sites near Hamshall outside of the green belt, clearly because of the way the green belt's drawn. You'll be aware, or some of you will be aware, there's another proposal near to Birch Coppice, which is outside the green belt, but wouldn't directly serve the need at and around Hamshall. So in terms of how do you meet the demand for a location, for a facility close to the location at Hamshall, the answer is no, you couldn't do that outside of the green belt. Are there other places where a truck stop might go? Potentially, yes. But I think the important thing to stress there is that the scale of need is so severe that its hotspot designation wasn't handed out to very many places. I think there were 7 nationally. There's almost certainly a need for more than one anyway. So we don't think that's necessarily a critical point. I think Mr. Brown's report sort of makes that point. So it's not quite fair to what was said before. Isn't quite right. We have assessed alternative in that form part of our application. Sorry, long answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dermot.
Thank you. I'm not sure exactly where I saw this in the papers, but I'm sure I saw some support from the operators of the Hamshall estate. as I understand it, there is a large area in Hounslow that has been given over to car parking until fairly recently. And I would like to know why we don't have any evidence to support the view that a site within Hounslow, which is outside the green belt, is actually using brownfield site. There is no evidence to suggest that anything has been done to explore that.
Thank you. Yeah, so important to stress, I don't represent or I'm not in any way working for the Hounslow estate. So
I realise that.
I know, but that's important. So I can't speak for them in that sense, but I can give an answer to your question. So,
But you could actually give an answer for the people that you are representing, because they should be approaching Hounslow as well.
yeah, so we've spoken to the operators at Hounslow. We've also spoken to the owners, operators of the site you mentioned within Hounslow, which was until relatively recent. I think COVID saw an end to the airport car park since it was on there prior. So we have spoken to them and the managing agents for the operators and owners of Hounslow. And you make a good point. I mean, in an ideal world, you would expect Hounslow perhaps to include a facility within the boundaries of the Hounslow estate. It doesn't, and the local plan doesn't require them to either. There's no allocation of a truck stop use there, and there's no planning requirement for them to do it. It doesn't mean it would clearly be logical, but it hasn't happened. We're not representing them. We aren't working with them. So the next best thing, in our view, you've acknowledged there is a problem. We're trying to solve it in a way we think is consistent with your policies by bringing forward a site as close as we can to the source of one of the biggest problems you've got, and as I say, it's been recognised nationally. Which I hope answers your question. I can't speak for the Hounslow operators.
Councillor Mrs. Clute.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to refer back to Councillor Bell's first question for the need. And you actually said that the government had done a consultation about the need for these stops. But as you can appreciate, the residents that live in the Greenbelt, I think they'd like, and as me as well in North Warwickshire, would like to know the local need, not the national need.
Yeah, okay. So what we did was clearly local. So it was, we counted vehicles around the Hounslow estate and area. We might have the number somewhere. I think we counted about 90, 80 vehicles parked on a various nights surveys in inappropriate places, and sometimes that they're dangerous places. They're not always dangerous from a road safety point of view. As I said, there are regular issues with crime to drive. So the local need has been assessed.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions, members? I just have one, if you don't mind, Mr. Harley. You referenced the government study in 2018, which I'm sure you'll agree is some time ago. And there's been material changes in the economy since 2018. When did you undertake your independent assessment, and what more up-to-date statistics do you think are available? Because I'm certainly aware that since 2018 there have been developments in the provision of car parking in the borough and elsewhere. Sorry, lorry parking in the borough.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, yes, 2018 was the government's national piece of work. Identified then an urgent need. I'm not aware, Mr. Brown challenged us a little while ago to go back and check whether we're aware of any additional supply across the borough, or certainly within the hotspot area. We're aware of ideas and other proposals that might be coming. We're not aware of significant additional supply. When you stand to be corrected, we haven't been able to find any. Mr. Brown didn't point us to any sites that we were aware of got planning permission for additional HGV truck stops. Our survey was done in time to inform our application, which was submitted in June 2020, so it would have been in advance of that. I think it was spring 2020 that we did our work. In late 2019, it was, when the application went in, Chair, the answer. Since then, government has recently, I mean, through the last 2 years, and it's listed, I won't list them all now, but in our addendum report, which I know forms part of the committee board pack, there are significant numbers of ministerial statements and government strategies around the distribution sector in general. And if you remember, some of the people we were clapping on Thursday during COVID were the HGV drivers that kept the food chain and other supply chains moving. So the government has realised that the lack of HGV safe places for HGV drivers to go is a big deterrent to recruitment and retention of staff in that important part of the distribution sector. So there are numerous material changes since our work and since the application came out, which have strengthened the case, we believe, and I think Mr. Brown recognised that actually in the way he's added a substantial weight to those issues.
Thanks very much. Members, any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Member, Councillor Sanders Smith, who's one of the two local councillors for the ward in question, has requested permission to speak. Councillor Smith, would you like to speak now or later on?
No, it's good for me, if it's good for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm here, as Chair says, to represent my ward, which is Curdworth Ward. And I don't think anybody will deny the fact that lorry drivers need somewhere safe to put up and sleep, that they're not approached or attacked in any way. However, I've been given some concerns, quite a few concerns in fact, by people that I've spoken to in Curdworth and surrounding district. Excuse me. It's mainly about the green belt that they're really disturbed about. We've got an awful lot of development going on as it is with HS2 and everything else. And I think the residents of Curdworth feel that this is just something else that's encroaching upon the green belt. And they're not really happy about it, as I don't think anybody is really, but these things do go on. But the other thing that worries people is the fact that the lorries may go through the village. And there are going to be signs and the routes are going to be planned out. But inevitably somebody's going to take a wrong turn in, especially as they come off the M42. They're going to naturally turn left because that's the way it's going to push them. And to get a big lorry like that through the village is going to cause absolute mayhem, if not some danger to the residents there. So I do support the villagers in their quest to have this refused.
Thanks very much. Councillor Hancock.
There's a couple of points that I'd like to make in a greater need for this, is that there is a need for HGV parking. It doesn't matter how much we like to ignore it, there is, and we have to accept that we are a hotbed of logistics in North Warwickshire. That's just the way we're planned out. There was a couple of mentions of another application. This is going to be the same issue faced again. So we have decisions as a council that I believe that we have to look at bigger issues, that when we build industrial estates, these have to be part of those plans from the get-go, because we're ending up here with residents sitting here scared of greenbelt. In a few months' time, it will be another place talking about their greenbelt or their villages, and it is a real concern. I believe we should be providing HGV drivers. They're a massive backbone for the country, but I can't support somebody that goes into the greenbelt of this case. But I think there's a bigger issue for the council to face in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo what Councillor Hancock has said, but I'm happy to support the recommendation, but I would like to point out that I think although not green belt, the green fields of Dordon are just as valuable to the people of Dordon as they are to Curdworth. And although they've had the people of Dordon have had much thrust upon them, you know, I think it's good that we're trying to make a stand there. And so without wishing to take anything away from that, I'm happy to support the recommendation, Chair.
Councillors, could I remind all of you very clearly, you are here to discuss the application that is in front of you and not any other application that might exist anywhere else in the world. I'd ask you just to be certain you are considering this application alone and not transfer those concerns to anything else. It's important in planning terms that you clearly distinguish that this is the application you're considering and that your views on other potential issues, which you may or may not see in the future, are not relevant. Councillor Hayfield.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very long and comprehensive report that the officers prepared for us. And gives weight to this, goes weight to that. But like Councillor, it comes down to me just two questions. Is there a need for this sort of facility in this part of North Warwickshire? And I think the answer is yes. Is this the right place to put it? The answer is no. And it's the green belt considerations that are listed here. So if you're proposing refusal, I'll say. I'll do it.
Councillor Riley?
Thank you, Chair. I too support the recommendation, Mr. Brown, that we should refuse this. I suppose the important thing to do is look at this green belt, this site, in the context of where it is. And this is a strip of green belt that starts at Packington, runs through Coleshill, runs through Waterloo, runs through Kernworth, runs through Wishaw and up to Middleton and out of the top of the borough. Now, I heard the speaker say that there would be limited harm, and I certainly don't agree with that. Because if you start breaking into this continuous strip, you put the whole thing at risk. Now, the purpose of Greenbelt is to prevent urban sprawl. And one of the things that we know about this specific location is that it is right next to the Birmingham boundary, it is right next to Kernworth, it is right next to the brand new HS2 line, at which point, at this very location, there will be more permanent and temporary infrastructure for HS2 than anywhere else in the country. And we've heard about Hamshall, and it is right next to Hamshall. So in terms of this tiny site, its prevention of urban sprawl and bringing Hamshall and Kernworth and Birmingham together has a significant function. And I certainly do not consider that to be limited harm. I think that this site is part of a whole, and that whole is fundamentally important. And I am pleased to hear colleagues recognise the local plan, recognise the value of the local plan. And yes, there is a need, but at the time being, there are alternative sites on Hamshall, as we have heard, and there is alternate road parking. So within the Hamshall site, it's not full by any means. There are no highway restrictions. There are places that HGVs park within the Hamshall site, and there is no additional need down there at the moment, from my opinion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jamie?
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to prolong the debate in more than needed, but I think Mr. Brown talked about the fine balance, and the fine balance as expressed in the paper is between the green belt, for which there obviously the balance has, in terms of recommendation, come down, that there is undue harm which would be caused. But we haven't talked much about the other balance, LP 34, and we've heard two different speakers claim different things in this chamber tonight. The first speaker claimed that there were already 200 additional truck stops that have been put within the 50-kilometre Golden Triangle. And then the second speaker said he, along with our planning officers, were not able to identify any of these additional truck stops that had come on board since 2018 in the national report. I am aware in terms of Junction 10 that the Moto Junction 10 service station has already had a planning application for an additional 35 HGV overnight truck stops on that site. But I find it helpful in terms of trying to assess this balance. If Mr. Brown could actually give us any data that he's got about this 50-kilometre triangle, and whether or not that claim that there are already a lot of new sites or places coming through, in order that we can understand that balance. Because I think if this goes to appeal, then that will be the challenge in terms of the decisions that we're making tonight.
Mr. Brown?
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've got to be clear about the actual areas we're talking about. Clearly, Mr. Hapgood related to 50-kilometre radius, which in fact is the Golden Triangle. It's not a hotspot between Hamshall and Birch Coppice, which is considerably less in area. In terms of the hotspot, then, as Councillor Chambers has indicated, there's the permission to extend the Dordon service area, and that is it. The Courtney motorway service area, as members will know, was approved at appeal some time ago now. That's outside the hotspot area. The big one that I know about in the Golden Triangle is clearly the one at Durft, down the A5. The expansion down there of the rail freight terminal. There's one down there. I'm not aware of others that are actually been granted planning permission. There are several in the pipeline, including, as members be aware, the strategic rail freight terminal at Hinckley, which is not yet submitted to the Secretary of State, but these are proposals.
Could I just clarify, Mr. Brown, just the proposal at Hinckley, has that been granted consent by Hinckley and Bosworth Council? And it's just going to the Secretary of State?
No, Mr. Chairman, that's a national infrastructure project. So it will go directly to the Secretary of State. It's not yet been submitted.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you very much. I mean, I agree that understanding the need and the supply of HGV parking facilities in our area is important, and I would suggest that we get a report on that coming to this meeting at another meeting. However, having listened to this, from my point of view, no matter the need, in my view, the green belt outweighs it in this case. So whether or not there's a need for this one, the harm done would be too great. Therefore, I'm willing to go with the recommendation. However, it is important for us going forward to understand what the need for HGV places are and what the possible other options are.
Thank you. Mr. Frank, could I just ask a little bit more information from you, please, as far as policy LP34 is concerned? Because, you know, I think that from what I understand, that's a fairly broad policy that covers the whole of the borough. Is there anything in our policy that talks about the need for a top site on this particular location?
I'm just looking at the actual working of RP34, Mr. Chairman. I'll read it out, Mr. Chairman, so that members are aware of it. It deals with town centres and airport parking, and then lorry parking. It's just a couple of sentences. Proposals which reduce lorry parking, either informal or formal parking areas, should be accompanied by evidence to support its loss and explore opportunities for alternative provision. In recognition of the borough's strategic location and demand for lorry parking, which is the point that is being made, the council will give weight to lorry parking provision and facilities and opportunities for alternative provision and for improved management in decision taking. So there's no location or site-specific reference in the policy, Mr. Chairman. It's a general recognition of the borough's strategic location and that the council will give weight to lorry parking provision and facilities, which is what I've done in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And secondly, I'd like to understand some more about the nationally identified hotspot. Does that have any planning weight at all? Is it part of the NPPF or is it ancillary government guidance?
It's not part of the NPPF, Mr. Chairman, but it's a material planning consideration which has been listed in the report, and I would give that substantial weight.
And my final question, Mr. Brown, in the recommendation, you mentioned the council considers there's a fine balance here, and you acknowledge some of the applicants' arguments. Is that normal to hear in a refusal recommendation, or would we simply make more of a comment that the application is refused and the reasons for refusal?
In this particular case, Mr. Chairman, there is a very fine balance, as I've outlined in the report. And I think if this goes to an appeal, then I think it's important for both parties and for the Secretary of State through his or her inspector that all the parties that are involved in that appeal know exactly where the council is coming from in order to narrow the content of any planning appeal, to narrow the matters that are discussed at that appeal.
Okay, Mr. Tobin, any guidance?
Nothing to add. As Brown said, it is really a weight issue. Identified the relevant policies and issues.
Members, any other comments? I mean, members, as you are aware, I don't normally make comments personally because I think it's unhelpful as the chairman to try and give you guidance. So please bear in mind I'm speaking to you as a councillor rather than as chairman of the planning board. In my personal view, protection of the green belt is the strongest policy we have in our plan. It's, I believe, the strongest policy in terms of the NPPF. Greenbelt is a precious and vulnerable benefit. Once you've built on it, you've built on it. I've never seen yet a piece of land that's developed in the greenbelt and goes back to a field. But we see plenty of bits of greenbelt that disappear. Across the last several years, this borough has lost going on for 20% of its greenbelt through national infrastructure issues, particularly, I mean, we have the M6 Relief Road go through our greenbelt, and we are about to suffer the HS2 going through our greenbelt. On all of our boundaries, development is occurring in the greenbelt associated with those developments. Mr. Brown says, in his view, this is a fine balance. If it is, it's becoming less fine as more and more of the greenbelt is developed. I think you need to go back to what were the reasons for establishing the greenbelt to begin with. And for sure, there are reasons. Yeah, I don't think anybody would possibly say that lorry drivers don't need somewhere safe, don't need provision, don't need facilities. That's not the issue. The issue is, where should it be, and does it need to be in the greenbelt? I think the applicant has made a noble case in terms of showing what the very special circumstances are. But from my perspective, personally, I think the greenbelt counts for more. So I'm not sure that I agree it is that much of a fine balance. It's always a balance, and you have to listen to the arguments on both sides. But I'm not along with Mr. Brown here. I think the issue is less finely weighted, and I'm rather more wishing to protect our greenbelt. Members, we've had a proposal which has been seconded for planning permission to be refused for the reasons set out in the programme. Councillor Phillips and Councillor Hayfield, are you content with that, or do you wish to change your minds?
I'm content, thank you, Chair. I'm happy if you want to tinker with the reasoning in the thing to strengthen the greenbelt argument. I have no difficulty with that.
I looked at how
tinker was the wrong
word.
word.
Tinkering, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Hayfield. I'll forgive the reference. Members, are there any other proposals? In which case it's been moved and seconded that the application is refused. Can I see those in favour? Can I see anybody against? That's unanimous, and planning consent is refused. If you don't mind, members, we'll adjourn for a couple of minutes just while I'm sure members of the public will be informed to sit for the rest of the meeting. We are. If you'd like to depart, you are more welcome to do so. Mr. Ledbetter, a very long journey home. We'll take agenda item number 5 next and move on to the Waterford Conservation Area amended boundary extension. Mrs. Ledbetter, anything to add to your report?
No, I've got nothing else to add. I've got questions.
Oh, you sat here for an hour. Nothing else to add? Members, to make it worth a while, having sat through the meeting, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Ledbetter? Councillor Lyon.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just again compliment the work that Mrs. Ledbetter has put into this? Obviously, as a local member from Waterford, I wholly support that we should get consultation. And I think the expertise that North Warwickshire Borough Council Planning and Development team have put into this is fantastic.
Thank you. I'm just slightly curious by the recommendation B. Have we done that now, or do we still need to go through recommendation B?
There were a few parts that were changed in amending the extension to the boundary, as you can see in Appendix B. And so the appraisal that accompanies the consultation is being worked to accommodate those changes to make sure that we produce a really thorough document that not only covers the area that's outlined, but the setting of the conservation area, so that it truly becomes a useful document to the planners to aid determination of areas of development in the surrounding areas as well. So I'm really keen to make this a document that works beyond its boundaries and also will help us form a decent template going forward with the other conservation areas that we are reviewing over the coming months, years, just to make sure that it's a completely workable document and that we get everything we want. So that's why this appraisal is going to be taking another couple of weeks, and then it will be distributed to you, certain members, the opposition spokesperson, etc., for consultation, just to make sure we get it absolutely right before it goes out to the public.
Okay, and just a couple of words on recommendation D. So if we have no negative, I presume, representations, I'd just like to shove in adverse there, because I wouldn't like to bring it back to us if all the recommendations said marvellous idea, get on with it, to delay it for that. So if we just say there be no adverse representations, we would be effectively saying tonight, subject to nobody objecting, that this is adopted policy at a stage in the future.
That sounds very reasonable. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Members, any comments, questions? Councillor Humphreys?
I was going to ask Mrs. Levitt, you mentioned the word years there. Does that become the gospel forever, or can it be attacked, or is there a review date? Well, we have to review everything.
The government do set out a requirement to regulate, show the exact wording, but to look at actual boundaries on a regular basis and review them. I tend to see that in terms of if there's any dramatic changes to them, and I think there's been enough time gone past since the last set of appraisals and reviews to really get to the nitty-gritty of seeing that there has been some serious changes to conservation areas and the areas around them. And as we get further away from there, making the conservation areas, we actually are incorporating more heritage buildings in it. And further in time we get, more heritage you acquire, in actual fact.
Okay, thank you.
That's why we're going to do it as a rolling process.
Councillor Hayfield?
Chair, if what you were saying about adverse and everything else is your proposition for this, I will second it.
And Joe, Councillor Hayfield, I thought you were going to say I'd missed out item C, because it appears in C as well as D.
Well, your wisdom is greater than mine, Chair. I'm still happy to second it.
And I thought you were going to say I was tinkering with the recommendation.
Harris, I thought.
I was just waiting for Councillor Hayfield to speak up.
So, Councillor Hayfield, you're proposing?
No, you're proposing.
Oh, I'm proposing the tinkered with amendment.
Yes.
And is there a seconder?
I'm
second. Okay. Members, any other comments, questions? In that case, can I see all those in favour of the amended recommendation? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. As before, Mrs. Ledbetter, if you'd like to sneak off home, you are more than welcome.
Thank you.
but you'll be missing the star turn of Mr. Dodds, who I think will take next, who also has a long journey home. So, yeah, we'll go back. Sure. So, members, if we now go to application, application number 576 for the Cattle Market Car Park, Station Street, Atherstone.
Grab the page number, please, Chair.
Part one. So that's 3 pages on part one.
Part one.
Have you found it?
Page 126. Document 1.
Document 1.
Chairman, I think that because it's Mr. Dobbs' last meeting, I think we should make him wait till the very end.
Oh, John, it's such a tempting thought, Councillor.
He's already planned his escape. I think we should go.
So we all found the agenda item.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to say that 2 or 3 things by way of introduction. First of all, the application has now changed to felling 3 cherry trees rather than the original submission 5. The plan is shown there on the screen. The 3 to be felled are at the rear, in the rear half of the car park. The 2 to be retained are at the front. Also, just to outline the nature of the application, as I've included in the introductory paragraph, this is not a planning application to do works to trees protected by an order. It's a notification application. The only remit that's available to the board is to put a tree preservation order on these trees or not. So that's the only decision to make. Now, there is a time period involved with that, and that period has now passed. 6 weeks since the application came in. So therefore, the default procedure is that no order be placed onto the trees. In any event, Mr. Chairman, that is the recommendation that's being made to you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Councillor Derrick.
Thank you. Notwithstanding that this isn't a planning application as such, I'm not entirely happy with it. I understand that work needs to be done and that those trees are not considered to be of very great value, and the aim is to put electric charging points into the cars and improve the number of car parking spaces. But 2 things really. We have a biodiversity aim in this council, and we're cutting 3 trees down and only replacing them with 3. I think we should be putting 2 in for every one that we cut down. And we're also suggesting that they're going to a location in Park and Meadow Street, but that is then taking some of the greenery away from the middle of the town. And at the entrance to this car park, there are trees in the middle of it, trees on the right-hand side of it, and a big bed with just some bushes in on the left-hand side, which would be more than big enough to put at least 1 tree that will improve the amenity in that area for very little cost. And there is no mention of that. The only reason that I can think of for not doing that is if that bed there doesn't belong to the Borough Council, particularly in light of our green agenda. So I would like to, if we can, include in the recommendations that we do something about that.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Hayfield.
Just trying to go back to why this is actually in front of us. So the only thing we can do is put a tree preservation order on, and it's now too late to do that. Why are we even discussing it?
Within planning terms, I think Mr. Brown has identified what you may and may not do. But don't forget, Councillor Hayfield, you are councillors, and this land is owned by another board of the council. Perfectly permissible for someone to propose that the board recommends to the resources board it does something or doesn't do something.
There's an idea.
Maybe you'd like to tinker between you with the recommendation. Yes. Councillor Clue.
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit disappointing, firstly, to say why we're here. I believe it's freedom of speech. And another thing is, there are any cherry trees. We can't do nothing about them, but they sustain insects, they sustain birds, they sustain the ozone layer, they sustain taking water off a concrete or tarmac car park. I believe it has been said that we are replacing some trees in another part of Addiston. But Chair, I haven't seen anything in black and white to actually tell me that those trees are being replaced. So, I would have felt more comfortable, or will feel more comfortable, if there is something in black and white to say, yes, the reason is a fair reason, I understand that, but these trees will be replaced. Mature trees, not a couple of spindly fingers. But I still feel that it is my right as a councillor to speak at this board about these trees. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Griffin.
Thank you. Just to think back what Councillor Sturvix said, I think we need to be looking at increasing our biodiversity and net biodiversity. I think that's important. We've got councils like Coventry who are actively digging up roads and streets to plant more and more and more to improve the drainage, to improve the pollution levels and to improve things like that. I think it's a backward step to actually reduce our green landscape inside an urban area. Even if we are putting something into what's existing green area, we do need these urban green spaces as well. And I think that consideration needs to be paid to, if we are taking green out of the urban environment, that there needs to be a substitute. So if there is a green bed there that can have trees planted in it or can be maximised, then we should be exploring
that. You said that we can go to the resources board with a recommendation. So can we try and do that? Because I do find it, I think it's really cool that we're trying to cut down trees to put electric charging points in. I think that is what the green agenda wanted. I'm sure that was the idea. So I do find it quite hilarious that we're doing that. So if we can come up with something that might change it to the resources board, I think we better come up with it.
Councillor Jordan.
Chair, do we know if we own that land where Councillor Derby suggested the bushes are?
Mr. Dobbs will be making his urgent speech to the planning board in a matter of seconds.
Can we save that question? Thank you.
Councillor Riley. Well, he might do if Councillor stops speaking, but Councillor Riley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I support the retention of these trees. I've been down to the site, and it is a pretty sparse open area, and without a doubt, we do have an amenity value. Not only for people using the car parking for the good image of Addiston, but also for the residents who all border this car park. So, in terms of privacy, in terms of screening, in terms of green infrastructure within Addiston, they do perform an important function.
I've got a lot of sympathy with that, but from what I understand, we can't do that. What we can do is is make a recommendation to the resources board to ask them to be more specific about in terms of the replacement trees and where they're going to be and how they're going to maintain the biodiversity of the area. All words to that effect, Chair.
And that is absolutely my understanding. The relevant bit of planning legislation, I don't even do anything about. The time for it has gone, as it normally has when it comes to it. But there's one group of councillors speaking to another group of councillors, and it's your oyster. Mr. Dobbs, do you have anything you wish to add?
I'm so pleased he came.
I absolutely, yes, that's the first thing to add, is how pleased I am. I mean, to be fair, Chair, I mean, I understand exactly what I'm just saying. And we don't want to be cutting down trees if we can avoid it. But the one thing we've been tasked with doing, and one thing I asked our engineers to look at when they were doing it, is just to maximise the capacity of this car park. So our main long-stay car park in Aston, indeed, in Borough, it's effectively the commuter car park for Atherstone. It's effectively the station car park for Atherstone, if we're being realistic. And therefore, we want to try and get as much capacity within that car parking area as we can possibly manage. Members will be aware that, we declare a climate emergency. We do need to do more in terms of shift away from of internal combustion engines, which is the reason why we're putting the charging infrastructure in there and why we're trying to maximise capacity so that people can come into there and use the train to travel further afield, therefore make it a stationary car park with big capacity, as well as all those other things. I think that the compromise we've gone for is to retain some of the trees that were previously being earmarked for being felled. So, obviously, we're more than happy to do that. We are working with the county council on tree planting schemes across the borough. So it's part of a wider piece of work in terms of increasing biodiversity, increasing the number of trees that are being planted. And I'm more than happy to look to increase the number of trees that we put in and around Athelston where we can to replace those that are lost at Capel Market. I'd certainly like to make a commitment that we can do the 2 for 1 that I think Councillor Hayfield has recommended. If we can't do that, then that's a poor show. So we can certainly do that. I'm happy to let any successor of mine report to Resources Board with exactly that sort of recommendation. I could agree to anything, but I won't. I would urge you to back the increase in capacity at Capel Market. It was our busiest car park for a long time pre-COVID. It was usually running at 100% capacity when the town was full, and I'm sure those days will return. So the more capacity we can get into Capel Market car park, the better. I don't believe, Councillor Davis, that we do own that piece of land. I will double check, of course. I believe it belongs to the GP surgery, which is chosen.
That's wow.
But I will double check. There's nothing to stop us talking to the GP surgery and saying, do you mind if we plant some trees on your land? So we will certainly do that as well. More than happy to make that commitment.
A golden opportunity there.
More than happy to make that commitment.
So, members, it seems Mr. Dobbs is offering kill one, get one free sort of offer. And I have to say, I have had so many inappropriate thoughts in my head about cutting down trees and buttons cons for tea and stuff like that. But
sorry to interrupt you, Chair, but I mean, can we just make sure that there are substantial trees? And you go on about hybrid elms, and I saw something on Country Park only yesterday morning about what goes on. These trees that are going to be substantial, be here for a long time. A cherry tree has a finite life, and these have been in there for about 30 years. So they're coming close to the end of their tree. So it'd be nice to get some reasonable trees into place. And I'm going to be interested in the bum fight that takes place when we redevelop the swimming pool area. There's 1 or 2 big trees there between the car park and that while we work out how we're going to get a road through.
Yes, before you.
But we mustn't be about anything outside what's in front of us.
Easy.
I've got a bit of change, Odie.
So, members, where would you like to go with this? I think pretty much we are in a situation where the recommendation as printed needs to be. But I think the recommendation B is that Resources Board consider this issue to ensure that the ecology of the area is preserved as far as possible, and that suitable alternative replacements and additional trees are provided in a prominent location within the town.
Second.
We all happy with that?
Yeah.
All those in favour? On those against? That's unanimous. Mr. Dobbs, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Very happy with that resolution. So thank you for that. Do you mind if I don't say it?
Yes.
As keen as I am to stay for the rest of the meeting. I feel I need to go home and feed my wife.
Well,
that's okay, I will do that.
I'm
not trying to be rude now, Richard, but you'll be able to spend all your time talking about rubbish in future.
Yeah, rather just a nice
All listening to it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dobbs. Good luck with the Smurf.
Take care, Richard.
Our best wishes.
Yeah,
and I hope to see as many of you as possible at the new facility as soon as it's open and receiving visitors. So I'd love to show you all around.
Oh, Mr. Dobbs, you know as well as I do, May is a coming and some of us will be recycled anyway.
Yellow Hats and I business, Richard.
Absolutely.
There's got trees up there.
So members, I appreciate you're all keen to start the meeting. So if we could consider the minutes of the board meeting held on the 7th of January. Are you happy that I sign it as a true and correct document? Thank you very much. We've done agenda item number 5. We now move on to agenda item 6, the general fund fees and charges. Mr. Brown, deputising for the Director of Resources, do you have anything to add as to why we're not increasing the by inflation?
I have 1 point to add, Mr. Chairman, and that is when we look at the revised budgets and later on the autumn, the pricing structure for local land charges searches will have to be changed in line with where we're going in terms of the land registry. So we will have to do an update in the revised budget later on in the year.
Just say, we will be abstaining on the budgetary matters, for budgetary reasons.
Thank you very much.
Move the recommendation, Chair.
And seconded by, thank you, all those in favour? And then abstain. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 7 is the general fund revenue estimate for 2023-24.
Again, Mr. Chairman, if members have any comments on it, I'll answer them. If not, then I'll direct them to the corporate director.
Just one question from me, Mr. Brown. As you are aware, I was concerned to understand where the funding for the HS2 role is. Is that matter still being addressed?
That's still being addressed, Mr. Chairman. HS2 are paying for a post. That money is held in a different budget, as far as I can understand it, and it will be transferred across to this budget at the appropriate time.
Thank you, members.
Councillor Jordan. Can I just make the point that I'm concerned about the net controllable expenditure changing? 2023 approved budget 32, revised budget profit 43, 23-24 49 loss. That's a big jump. Is there any particular reason for that, please?
The main reason, Mr. Chairman, is because the cost of the HS2 post is in there. That will be recharged because, as I say, HS2 are paying for that. So therefore, it will be reduced at the appropriate time when it goes through the budget cycle.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Brown, what we're saying is the net controllable expenditure is likely to be different to what is printed here. And perhaps, members, you would want to put in a sort of comment on recommendation A, subject to consideration of the of the funding from HS2 in respect of that post.
Yeah.
Councillor Hayfield, I think.
Well, I was going to say move the recommendation, but now move the revised recommendation.
Thank you. Any other comments, members? All those in favour? Those abstaining? Any against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We now move to agenda item 8, the provisions, or rather the revisions to the 2021 NPPF consultation. Mr. Brown.
Again, Mr. Chairman, this is a very lengthy report. Most of this has been flagged up in previous reports when the government's planning reforms have been reported to you. And therefore, from an officer point of view, there are no surprises in this consultation paper at all. The actual consultation asks a whole series of questions. So rather than go through each of those one by one, what Dorothy and I have done is segregate out various paragraphs and certain subject areas, as you can see, throughout the report. And if members have got any comments on that, then as the recommendation indicates, we can forward those on.
So can I just check, Mr. Brown, your recommendation to the is it that the board is adopting your suggested consultation, or will this come back to us at a future point?
It'll have to come back to you, Mr. Chairman, when the consultation the government completes its consultation exercise, and we actually see the changes that are being made, the final changes that are being made to the NPPF. And at that time, we will indicate what the consequences are for the council and its planning policies.
I'm happy with that, Mr. Brown, but there are 58 questions the government is desperate for our opinion on.
I'm quite happy to bring another report to you, Mr. Chairman, with answers to all 58, if that's what the board wishes to see.
Oh, I'm sure they don't, Mr. Brown. But members, I think we would like to have sight of Mr. Brown's wisdom in his 58 responses at some stage. Members, I would say the reason I'm pushing this, in my humble opinion, a lot of this is the government shutting the door after the horse has bolted. A lot of adverse impacts across the country have been felt by some of the things which are now being put right in this consultation. And in a lot of respects, on that basis, it is welcome. But it's not, it's the curate's egg, as usual. And there are things in here which I am deeply concerned about. It strikes me that the issue in terms of reducing the need for a 5-year housing supply is very welcome. But the sting in the tail of that, I think, is it makes it ever more likely that we will have to have a new local plan more frequently. And I'm sure you all remember the last local plan took us a lot of blood, sweat, tears and anguish to get to and cost us £550,000. If we've got to have borough plans more frequently, you know, it's going to make the net controllable expenditure we just dealt with a drop in the ocean. Okay, it's not, doesn't come to this board, but it goes to the LDF. But every time we go through a borough plan, it's something like 550,000 quid. And okay, in here they talk about we don't have to justify, but you still have to have evidence in support of what the plan is going to be. So whilst I can see a lot in here that is welcome to correct the government's past mistakes, I don't think this is entirely sweetness and apple pie and everything's going to be rosy in the future. You know, I mean, I'm delighted to see the end of the duty to cooperate. But what is the difference between a duty to cooperate and a requirement to be in alignment? What does it mean? It sounds like the same thing, unless Mr. Brown in his 58 responses can tell us differently. Councillor Hickman.
Yeah, there's a sense of deja vu reading some of this, because there's the issues that the government's clearly focused on before, and previous governments before them. And of course, we're looking at something that tackles their national agenda rather than just our local one. There's the levelling up and everything else. But you're right in terms of the duty to cooperate. Introduce an alignment policy, which no doubt will be a filter through which our plans will be looked at anyway. So I really don't see any difference, other than people didn't like the duty to cooperate, so you're going to call it something different. Which is, and Chair, what on earth are beautiful homes? It's supposed to be in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? And I can still see applications coming in for producing some expensive, beautiful homes. And as soon as they've got a planning consent, they'll put a second application in for slightly less beautiful homes at cheaper prices. And we've already surrendered most of the principles of development. And
the one thing in there that I thought was really positive was one of the changes that I think says we have, I'm paraphrasing clearly, but we have more opportunity to look at changes to previously approved schemes when they reduce the societal benefit, I think, of applications that we've granted. So we all know of applications which have been granted, and then you have amendments to water down the impact, not impugning the behaviour of developers. But there is something in here that will make that easier for us to say no to, as opposed to the normal test of is it material.
There is also, to finish my comments, Chair, that a gap I see here is, and this is pointed out to me, is the infrastructure bit, the fact that the requirement for developers and things to be sort of contributing and planning out in proper infrastructure support for all these new houses they want. Because unless you've got that, you've just got a housing estate and you haven't got communities. It's the infrastructure that will take a housing estate and turn it into part of the community. And that's something that I don't see addressed here at all.
However, following on from that, there is something in there that is about taking into account when awarding planning permissions the behaviour of developers in the past. for instance, if they have had planning permissions which they haven't completed, or if they haven't completed infrastructure work, and that can take substantial weight, I think, in that term, when you are looking future. And that if developments that have planning permission do not go ahead within quite a short time, then the planning permission falls, or if they're not completed within a certain time, and that includes the infrastructure part of it. Now, it doesn't go all the way, and I think there should be other penalties for it, but it is something that we've been considering for a long time, giving these planning permissions that never actually happen. And I think this could help towards that. I think we need further teeth to it, really. At least it's a step in the right direction. And I'd be interested to hear, not tonight, but what Mr. Brown's reaction to that is, and what others think about actually bringing forward the applications that have already been awarded. I think that we do have a lot of those that are sort of put in the pending, in the back pocket for later for developers.
I think you make a fair point, Councillor Davies, but in the modern economy, you know, the swings and arrows of outrageous fortune do lead to boom and bust. And I think there is undoubtedly practice for developers to build up a land bank. But at the same time, I think, you know, we've got many applications, so a significant one, at least in Haverstown, where a lot of houses could have been built. And the positive, I think, is in the past government has pilloried local authorities for not granting enough, when the reality is we've granted plenty. I can't remember, is it something like 3 million homes or something across the country being granted consent and not taken up? That would make a substantial bite into the cherry. And whilst I can see advantages in that, for me, question 30 is way too broad. Do we agree in principle the applicant's past behaviour should be taken into account in decision making? Well, that is so broad that, you know, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt of assuming they mean in relation to planning legislation. But, you know, I just think that there is a lot of this which will be almost impossible for us to deliver unless we have real clear guidance, almost, you know, strict guidance. It'll just open up a whole range of questions of a legal nature as to how we implement that and what we can and can't take into account.
This is why I say that it's a start with what we've got there, but we need more. We need to know what is behind it.
I just want to follow that, as pointed out in the report, that they would require primary legislation for either of those proposals to be implemented, and that's the thing that, as a general principle, as you say, it sounds as if it will give you another matter of material consideration, but without some clear legislation saying what that past behaviour is and when you can take it into account, it unfortunately it's not going to add much, and so just it's an interesting question, but it won't be in the new MPF because there's no legislation to back it up. So, but it's still something it'd be interesting just to see the responses, and then whether we do decide to implement legislation.
There's jam tomorrow, Councillor Doe. Councillor White?
Yeah, Chairman, it's only to observe that this consultation really identifies that we need to develop our thinking regardless of who is in administration of the domain. There are clear commitments to a rural business economy in there. Now, I don't think we've ever sat down and talked about the agricultural economy of North Warwickshire, but clearly we need to be clear in our own mind what it is and what its value is. Same goes with the whole issue of offset, and means as we sit right next to a major city, or West Midlands as you probably better call it, we need to be clear about the offset value of North Warwickshire as we move forward. And then it's that whole issue, isn't it, about renewable energy, and okay, the reference in here to offshore wind farms, which certainly don't relate to North Warwickshire, there is clearly a consideration about renewable energy sources and the prevalence of solar panels and infrastructure such as battery storage that is now coming into the borough. So post-May, I think that there is some work that we need to buckle down to and think about what is the future of North Warwickshire as we move forward.
Can I just point out that it's onshore, not offshore?
Onshore, beg your pardon. Onshore.
I agree with what you're saying, and particularly with this sort of, I can't remember the phases, Mr. Brown, but the extra 35% for the top 20 towns and cities where they're apparently going to fit all this additional development on brownfield, which is fascinating, given we had to take 10,000 houses for Birmingham because they haven't got any brownfield left. And they're going to make some. So, members, are you content that the report is noted and further reports are prepared as Mr. Brown considers and cogitates his response to the government's 58 questions?
58.
Agreed. Yeah. All those in favour? Those against? Thank you very much. We now consider agenda item number 9, the infrastructure funding statement. Mr. Brown, with particular reference to the 3 tables, if you don't mind.
Yes, sorry. I must agree, they are a little bit confusing to read. This is the annual report that we have to do to show, to set out the contributions that we received on Section 106 agreements, particularly to report on those contributions which we have control over. Now, those 3 areas that we have control over are affordable housing provision, recreation open space, and economic development. The rest of the monies are either go directly to the county council and other agencies, or we pass it on. In terms of the 3 tables, then they are difficult to read, and I've had a word with finance colleagues to see if we can sort this out later on for subsequent statements. The important thing is to read them perhaps vertically rather than horizontally. And the word total at the end is also somewhat misleading. So if I can tell you that if you work down, then table A is the value of the payment received and purpose of payment. So the first line there is affordable housing. So we have received just over 1.5 million in terms of contributions toward affordable housing, top right-hand corner of that table. Move down to table 2. Then this is what's been spent. So we spent 1,300,000 of that 1.5 million, which leaves us then with the 282 top right in table 3. So that's the money that we've now got available this year, cumulative money that we've got available this year to spend on affordable housing, and the figures on the different other contributions run all the way down. So it's done on an annual basis, but you should really look down rather than across. And that's where the figures, the 282 and the other figures that are in table 3 are referred to in the statement, and that's where the reason where they have been arrived at, Mr. Chairman. I agree it's not clear, and as I said, I'm speaking to finance colleagues so that subsequent statements perhaps illustrate it a little bit better.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. It's certainly not clear. It's as clear as government planning policy to me. I would, if you like, members, I'm happy that we publish the words. I do think that we need to have a tape or set of tables attached to it that are comprehensible to members of the public. So I'd amend the recommendation slightly, so yes, we publish it, but with a restated table. I know that's extra work for the finance team, but actually, I don't see how everybody's going to understand this. I mean, they could all have a word with Mr. Brown, but I think his telephone will be busy enough as it is. Any comments, questions? Councillor Bell?
Thanks, yeah. A comment, not on what you've just said, but this is useful, and it would be really useful. Are we entitled to ask Warwickshire County Council, the Integrated Care Board and the police for a similar breakdown for North Warwickshire only, not for the whole of what they've got? So we know where they are with the money we've possible to them, because that I feel that we don't have a grip on that at all.
The County Council, Mr. Chairman, has to produce its own annual statement.
Yes, but it'll be collated across the whole county.
It will be. I can ask the officers there for a specific North Warwickshire breakdown, but it will be only on the contributions that the county council controls. So the money that goes to the George Eliot NH Trust will not be included within that.
No, but I know that the Integrated Care Board has now tasked someone with trying to make sense of all the money they've got and sitting on in there, and it's not an easy job. And I think we should add to the pressure by saying, actually, we'd like to see what the money that North Warwickshire has given you for health and what's happened to it. And I suspect something similar from the police as well.
Just an example of alignment policy.
A what?
Alignment policy.
Alignment. Gosh.
We in the MPPF, whatever it is.
Right, yeah, it's okay.
Councillor,
Chair, a meeting last week with the police commissioners people. They talked about 106, it was put into the budget. I know they get 129 million, but they were talking about waxing lyrical about the 1.6 million they get in section 106 money. So at the time we asked for a breakdown of where the money comes from. But one of the points I did make, I'd actually only been looking at 4 different applications recently that we've done, where we had a 12,500, an 8,000 and 2 no applications at all from the police for 106 money. So is it sort of ad hoc? Are they entitled to ask for 106 money with every application? Because both the 2 other applications were of similar size, you know, a few dozen houses. It just seems to me there's an opportunity to increase the 1.6, which would go into police funding, or do they do it as a whim? Because it seems to me sometimes the hospital never asks, doctors never ask, it goes on and on and on. And I just wonder, but I'm waiting for information to see where the 106 money's come. That was Warwick-wide, so I don't know how much is in the north, but it seems like a very laissez-faire sort of process. I don't know if you can say anything about that.
there are rules and regulations which apply to what we can ask for as far as 106 is concerned. And I think it has to be justified. It has to be justified within the context of what the planning consent is. Is there anything more specific you can say?
There are 2 things, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, particularly the police and George Eliot NHS Trust would normally only ask for contributions on major applications, not minor applications. And secondly, I'm totally dependent on them supplying me with a request.
I do appreciate it.
We've chased them, but if they don't get a request, then there's no contribution.
Yeah, can I say, Chair, I got from the conversation we had with the finance bill, I actually think it's apathy that actually meant they didn't ask rather than need. Some they ask for because they think about it. I don't know what is a major application?
It's over 10 houses.
Oh, okay. Well, all of these were over 10 houses. Thank you.
Yeah, just for information, I am sort of doing this from the other side as well, because I absolutely agree that there are points at which 106 contributions should have been asked for. So in highways terms, down Plowhill Road, for example, and they didn't. And neither did they ask for a contribution to the GP surgery, although they've added 2,000 or 3,000 more customer patients to the GP surgery. So I am asking the county, what are the processes and how are you working with the ICB on making sure that these things are asked for? They did actually offer, I think they offered a meeting, which I think we ought to pursue with us so that we can coordinate. I don't care about the rest of the county. We can coordinate, we North Warwickshire can coordinate with them about what's needed. So I'll keep pursuing.
Okay, thank you, members. I mean, I think everything what you said is right. I think some of it is apathy, some of it is they haven't got the time. Some of it is, maybe they can't justify it. But I do think, Mr. Brown, it would be helpful for members to see from the major organisations that receive 106 money. I mean, at the end of the day, this money is granted to mitigate the adverse effects of planning consents. Yeah. So it's important that it's received, and it's even more important that when they get it, it's actually spent and it's used for the purpose. I mean, across the country, I know a local law firm made a reasonable amount of money on challenging other planning authorities who hadn't spent the money within the time frame and the strictures of the agreement, and it had to be returned to them. So members generally, we are not in that situation. But I do think we'd like to see a little bit more. So, Mr. Brown, if we could amend the recommendation to, in terms of what I would propose, that we amend the recommendation to publish the report, but with an amended table to make it clear or clearer to a layperson what is being said, and that we ask those partners that we've referred to for information on what have they done with the cash that has been sent to them. Are we content with that? Could I have a seconder? Thank you very much. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to the applications. The first one is a consultation, 0002 for Weddington Road, Nuneaton. Mr. Brown, anything to add?
I'll have to go back, Mr. Chairman, just to get the slide. Just to get the slides, I'll have to move back. Just so that you can see where we are. This is the site. It's not very clear, but this is the best we can do from the application papers. This is the former railway line on the west side of Nuneaton. The A5 is at the top here. The West Coast Main Line is down here. This is the recent developments as you come out of Nuneaton on the Weddington Road, as you come out here. Our boundary is here. This is the Weddington Road, the A444, which eventually goes up the Redgate roundabout here. The village of Caldecott is just about here on the top left of the plan. So the application site is this large area of land here, as you see outlined in red. The Myra site touches it here. So the Myra site is that small little triangle, the bottom half of that site. And then in terms of the layout, that's what's being shown. It's illustrative, 700 houses with a roundabout junction, Weddington Lane. The roundabout junction proposed for the Myra development is just about up here, well, just off the plan, at the top here, right on the edge of that. As you can see, Mr. Chairman, we've raised 3 or 4 matters, quite substantial matters, and I'd ask you to endorse those such that we actually object to this proposal and be involved in discussions with the Highway Authority and our colleagues at Nuneaton to see where we go on this. It could well prejudice the employment allocation at Milo.
I would like to move the recommendation. There are a lot of questions that we want answers from Nuneaton and Bedworth for a council for what we've seen is not satisfactory. It doesn't answer all the questions. There's no evidence that they've actually taken into consideration some of the points, and I think that we need to work with them to try and address those. So I would move the recommendation.
I think you're absolutely right. Myra is important, but so is the new conservation area in Caldecott. And the traffic impact and everything else. I mean, I'm just shocked there hasn't been detailed consultation with the society, and this feels more perfunctory. I just draw their attention to the amount of engagement we've had with Tamworth Borough Council on our proposals on their boundary. If they'd like to talk to us in that context, that would be more helpful.
I was hoping that you'd mention the conservation area. I was deliberately holding back from it.
I was waiting for Prince Rupert to make an appearance. Members, that's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. We now have application number 606 for Church Lane, Liverpool. Mr. Brown.
Again, Mr. Chairman, run through the slides. The site here is a semi-detached at 22, as you can see on the screen at the present time, north side of the road. The annex is at the back, the detached annex is at the back, right at the rear garden, as you can see there. And then in terms of floor area and elevations, it's a flat roof structure, as you can see there, and then the other elevations. The report was written a little while ago, Mr. Chairman, but and it does refer to an objection. I can tell you now that we have received 20 objections to this proposal from residents in Middleton. There are several matters raised. The planning issues relate to privacy issues and overlooking. In other words, the development would be here and there's an issue with overlooking at upstairs and downstairs windows on the neighbouring property. Loss of light to neighbouring amenities and many neighbouring gardens. Poor design, not in keeping with the character of the village. The building is too big. It's backland development, and it will create a precedent for further backland development. Noise and disturbance from the use. The proposal doesn't align with our settlement hierarchy. There will be additional parking requirements on the road and doesn't meet space standards. So there's quite a list there or schedule of planning matters. There are also non-planning matters raised about the expenditure to build this and other matters to do with antisocial behaviour. Those are clearly non-material considerations and no weight at all should be given to those matters, Mr. Chairman. The report addresses the planning considerations, and as you can see, from our point of view, it does comply or does accord with the relevant planning policies. There's quite an important fallback position here, and as members will be aware, outbuildings can be erected within a back garden without the need for a planning application. This is, in fact, they can cover half of that back garden could be covered with outbuildings without the need for a planning application. Talking about hobby rooms, sun houses, glass houses, sheds, which we've had before, not only in Middleton but elsewhere in the borough, and also annexes. Members have approved annexes particularly good for elderly parents in an annex at the rear of the garden. So it's nothing unusual at all. And for those considerations, Mr. Chairman, and particularly the fallback consideration, the recommendation is one of approval.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Members, the other thing I'd add is, yes, there are those fallback conditions, but it's this authority that is the applicant. So I would sincerely hope that another part of the authority isn't going to say, well, we'll adopt a fallback position and stymie what the board wishes to achieve. There have been a substantial number of objections to this application, some of which are more on point than others. To my mind, this is right hard on the edge of the development boundary for the village, looking straight into the greenbelt. Equally, the separation distance from this habitable extension, which is not an extension, it's a separate building, will look straight into the back of neighbouring properties with a lesser separation distance than is our normal. So, members, I'd say I understand the reasons, the non-planning reasons for this application, but I don't think it is treating the neighbours with appropriate respect. So I would like to propose that we defer this item for site visit and further consideration and discussion with the Housing Division to see if this is the best possible solution. Any other comments, questions? That's all those in favour of deferment and site visit. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. The next application is, sorry, I've lost, we've moved that far around the agenda. I've lost my own place in it.
Kenny Brendan is the first one in part 3.
Thank you very much. So it's the application number 204 for land south of Doe House Farm, Spon Lane, Brendan. Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is reported back to you following a deferral. The introduction to the report indicates the reasons for those deferrals and also updated information as a consequence of further discussions with the applicant. You will see that they've sent a revised statement in, which is attached to Appendix B, which covers the matters that the board is concerned about, particularly the reduction in the height of the bund A, which is causing the main concern, and also the stripping of that particular part of that bund to remove unsuitable material and then to topsoil it. There's also been a lot of engagement with the local flood authority in terms of the drainage issues here, and the applicant has complied with and followed the guidance given to them by that authority, and that authority has no objection to the current situation. So, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation is one for approval. The parish council has written to us explaining that reasons why they still object to the proposal. That was circulated to you the end of last week, and there's a hard copy of that email circulated around the table today, and that reflects the matters which were expressed at the last meeting. Basically, they're objecting. They don't see the need for the bund, and they think that the bund itself, this is bund A in the corner of the site, will have a detrimental effect on residential amenity. But they've expressed their objections to Chairman with raising several matters there, and members should have had the opportunity to actually have read that over the weekend.
Can I just say, as usual, members, this is the items on your desk in front of you. Have you all had an opportunity to read it? Yeah. Thank you very much. Anything else, Mr. Brown?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Members, any comments, proposals? Councillor Humphries.
Speaker.
Sorry. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. We have a Mr. Mark Jones, who has no doubt been very patiently waiting on Teams. Mr. Jones, are you still with us?
I am, yes. Good evening.
Well, good evening, Mr. Jones. Welcome to the meeting. Mr. Tobin will talk you through the regulations for public speaking.
Good evening. You may have seen the speakers earlier today. In common with them, you'll be given 3 minutes in which to address the board. So I'll let you know when your 3 minutes starts. I'll let you know when there's 1 minute remaining. Then if I still speak at the end, I'll let you know when your time's up. Okay. Your time starts now.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this application. As you know, it's formed basically into 2 parts. So the first part of the application is to relocate the informal area of play, which is essentially undulations, mounds and log features from the original location. We've obviously worked with the officers and the residents to look at several options there before settling on a linear feature to the east of the site. In that location there's a landscape buffer to the properties, and we feel that this linear nature offers visibility, overlooking, and should deter congregations. And it was just felt as being the better of the options available on the site. The second part of the application is for landscaped earth bunds to improve privacy and reduce overlooking. These features were actually initially suggested in response to a complaint from a resident on Watling Street, who complained that being overlooked by the new properties was blighting their home. So we've done a lot of work on these and conversations. I think it's key to note that there is still work required to these bunds. So as has been mentioned by Mr. Brown, bund A is due to be reduced in height by around 750 millimetres, which is about a third of the height. But it should still provide the screening and privacy that we're looking for. Then previous discussions, there was concern from members and obviously the parish council regarding rubble and waste within the bunds. We've confirmed that we were aware of this material in certain locations, and the intention is to remove any of that material, scrape off and topsoil prior to landscaping. And then obviously the management company will take on those areas. They will do a thorough inspection of the area, and that's a third-party management company that all of the residents will pay into and all be responsible to, and they'll obviously work in accordance with the landscape management plan that's previously been approved. I think the flooding issues have already been covered by Mr. Brown, so I think we'll leave it at that. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you can support this application now.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? Councillor Humphries?
No, it's not in my area, Chair, but because my daughter lives on the other estate and people know her, they've approached me anyway. And I spoke last time about, I've seen the pictures now of the holes that they've done. And I was told earlier today that you had no complaints from any residents at all. There's only been one from the chair of the parish council. Is that That's true.
So that's a question to our speaker, yeah?
Yes, no, that's a question. Sorry, I'm in the wrong part of the meeting.
You are.
Yeah, come slap me later.
Mr. Jones, have you had any complaints from residents directly?
We haven't had any, no.
Thank you.
Councillor Clues?
Yes, Chair, through you, Chair. Could I just ask, is the management committee going to take on the management of the play area also?
Is that for me? Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. The management company say they're a third party. That all of the residents will need to contribute to that management company, and yes, it will be all the landscaped areas that they'll maintain.
And I think I'm right in saying, Mr. Jones, it's a third party company, but it's one that you as the developer will be instrumental in setting the terms of reference for.
We'll set it up, and yes, they'll need to work in accordance with the landscape management plan that's been approved previously. Yes.
Thank you, Paul. Any other questions, members? Just one from me then, Mr. Jones. You will have seen the comments we've had from David Cox, the chairman of Grendon Parish Council. Would you mind following up with Mr. Cox? Clearly, the Parish Council have some significant misgivings, and I think it would be helpful for all of us if you could liaise with the Parish Council and try to reach any mutual agreement with them to assuage their concerns. I think you've referred to a lot of their issues in your comments to us tonight.
Yeah, I think we've got no issues having conversations with them and picking it up. But yeah, I do think we've dealt with those concerns through the application process to get to this point.
Yeah, I can understand that, but sometimes two organisations sitting down together can.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem at all. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There are no other questions, Mr. Jones, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Members, any comments, proposals? Councillor Humphreys?
I'm coming back to what I'm saying about seeing that they've done the boreholes there and checking for rain. I personally have walked around and seen waste, and I have had people on the back end of Dairy House Farm area in the first Bellway estate, and someone on or a pair of neighbours on Watling Street speak to me complaining about the rain. Has the council had any issues from any other neighbours?
Mr. Brown?
As you can see from the previous report in Appendix A, Mr. Chairman, we had objections from the Parish Council on 5 residents, and also we've had letters of support. So it's been a mixed bag. Once this amended scheme came in, the Parish Council's reconsulted, and as you can see from the email, they still object. I've had no emails from other residents.
Oh, okay, thank you very much for that. And that's it. Just clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the sake of good order, I've had issues raised with me directed by at least one resident, but nothing in the last couple of months. Councillor Hayfield?
I think this application has moved on when we last saw it. I think I've got reassurance in areas that I had concerns about before. And on that basis, I'll move the recommendation of planning consent is granted.
Thank you. Is that proposal seconded? Seconded. Are there any other recommendations? In which case it's been proposed and seconded. Can I see those in favour of granting consent? And those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. So planning permission is granted. We now move on to agenda item number 11. And before we do that, members, I would like to move the first consultation, or rather the first appeal decisions relating to Kirkby Farmarton Road, Hartsell, into part 2 of the agenda, because I consider there are issues we may wish to raise relating to enforcement and other matters which should be considered in private session. Mr. Toby, can you tell us the form of words?
Chair, if the board considers that it's in the public interest to hold that matter in private, and that is better that that discussion doesn't take place in the presence of the public, albeit by YouTube. do you believe it's more important that plans come down in favour of not allowing the public to discussion, and since you may also receive legal advice on the issue, you think that that helps tip the balance in favour of excluding the public?
So it's section what of the Local Government Act?
It's Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act, and it's paragraph 6, which is whether the council may serve notice or order under any enactment.
Thank you very much. So, members, I will propose that recommendation. All those in favour? Thank you very much. So we'll go on to discuss the other appeal decisions, but not that one. So, members, any comments on the other two appeal decisions in front of you? Mr. Brown, anything to add? Sorry.
No, Mr. Chairman. They came through quite swiftly, and as you can see from our point of view, the first one supported the appeal was dismissed, supporting refusal, and in the second one, even though the inspector quashed the notice, the effect of the notice was that the works were done in any event.
And I think, Mr. Brown, you've had a further swift appeal decision.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, circulated very swift. That's extremely unusual. About 3 or 4 days from the closure of the appeal. And this is the proposed swimming pool, use of the swimming pool in Osprey, which was circulated to members. That appeal was dismissed, and a costs application also dismissed.
Anything to add, members, or you, Councillor Humphrey?
I just, before I come to the meeting today, I've had and I think you may have had similar correspondence because the same chap keeps contacting both of us. They were still doing it again today. So will we enforce?
What were they doing?
They were same people driving up there, only visiting the site, maybe.
For the avoidance made out for
All
the
dressed in
members,
town,
I
dressed
think
in gowns.
you're talking about the swimming pool application.
Yes, so the same people, and there were people going up there during the day again today, and I'm sure that they will photograph them again tomorrow. Whether there's provenance on all that information, but if it's still going on, we need to make sure it stops. Thank you.
So, members, I'd like to add that to my earlier recommendation for consideration if not to.
Strictly, Chair, you should perhaps vote on that again because it's an addition.
Those in favour? Those against? Thank you very much. So there were no other items on the agenda, but I'll propose that we note the two appeal decisions.
Agreed.
Those in favour? Thank you very much. So, members, I now formally move that we move into private confidential session for the reasons given previously.
Agreed.
Those in favour? Thank you very much. And if we could tell